Mr. President, like everybody here, I've followed these votes and the negotiations and did vote, and I'm encouraged by the progress made on the Transportation-HUD Appropriations bill, which we've now approved. It funds our nation's ongoing transportation investments, but if I might just speak of one part of the country it helps. It includes crucial emergency disaster funding for Vermont and the other states struggling to recover from Hurricane Tropical Storm Irene. This bill is part of the response needed from Congress by thousands of Vermonters, actually by millions of other Americans. It's vital not only for the economy of Vermont and other states whose roads and bridges were decimated by the storm, but for the nation's economy. And I commend Chair Senator Murray and the ranking member, Senator Collins, for their hard work in this. Mr. President, I've said many times on this floor, Hurricane Irene was devastating to our small state of Vermont. I was born in Vermont, as were my parents. And I've never seen destruction of this magnitude. The only thing that even comes near it is some of the things my grandparents used to tell me about when they were younger, of floods in Vermont. This flood and the flash floods caused by the storm destroyed homes and farms, businesses, bridges, and roads, things that had stood for over a century, were wiped out in a matter of minutes. It just washed the roads and structures away. I helicoptered over Vermont with Governor Shumlin and General Doobie, the head of our Vermont National Guard, the day after the storm, and none of us could believe the things we were seeing. And we know the repair costs are going to be well over $100 million. In our little state, we're stretched to the limit. Now, Vermont moved immediately. I mean, as the rain stopped, we had crews in there working to repair things. We didn't wait for anybody else. We just started moving, neighbors helping neighbors, our state and local governments working, our National Guard, Red Cross, everybody working. But we do need federal disaster recovery loans and grants to help those whose lives were upturned by Irene. Federal disaster recovery aid has always been available to other states after something like this. We need it now in Vermont. And this bill is an essential part of the work that Congress should be doing in response to major events like Irene, and the imperative of pulling together as a nation to heal these wounds. The Senate, the presiding officer recall when he reconvened after Labor Day, those of us on appropriations worked on this bill and other disaster relief legislation. They've been top priorities for Vermont, for many other states. Many other committees were involved. Certainly the Vermont delegation worked together on this, but other senators came together to help us. Week by week, we've made progress. We've overcome a series of legislative obstacles. One by one, we've been able to turn the lights from red to green in a legislative process that this year has been unduly cumbersome, non-responsive, actually different than I've ever seen in the years I've spent here in the Senate. But the progress that we've achieved here in the Senate is a testament to the determination of many in this body who have been willing to set aside ideological imperatives and partisan differences to work together as Republicans and Democrats to accomplish the work that the American people and our constituents expect from their government. Now, in Vermont and the other New England states, winter is not just on the horizon, it's on our doorstep. In our state last weekend, we had more than a foot of snow in some parts. I mention this because if you're going to repair roads and bridges, time's a significant factor, time slipping away. We all know that roads and bridges are the circulatory system of our commerce, whether it's the daily lives of living, breathing communities and their citizens, for people who have to go to work, go to school, or be together with their families. And so with many of the federal aid disaster programs underfunded, I am especially pleased that this bill contains the $1.9 billion that I and others worked to include to replenish the Federal Highway Disaster Relief Fund. That's going to help rebuild Vermont's vital roadways. And these roadways are critical. They rebuild our economy, they distribute aid, they bring people to hospitals, to schools. It's of the utmost importance that this federal aid reaches Vermont sooner rather than later. You know, our winters can be extremely harsh. I look at Washington, D.C., which will close down with 3 inches of snow. We call that a dusting in our state. Well, many times we'll have a foot of snow overnight. Schools will still open. Commerce still goes on. But you don't rebuild roads with a foot of snow on them. So we have to be working now, and we have to be prepared to work immediately when the snows stop. I've talked with Governor Shumlin, who's spent every single day working on this, and to Senator Sanders and Congressman Welch. Marcel and I, my wife Marcel and I, have driven around the state. We've talked to community leaders, to those who've worked on disaster relief and others. It's very clear, given the mammoth, unprecedented destruction of the storm. Certain waivers are needed to allow states to have funds for repair work that they need without going through all kinds of burdens for those repairs. I mention these waivers, Mr. President, because if we're going to ensure that Vermont and the other states can promptly design and begin emergency and permanent repairs, we have to do it now. We put the waivers into this bill, and I hope the other body will understand that we need them. This bill and its investments in America's crumbling and damaged roads and bridges is a crucial step. It will help restore the economic vitality of our country. I'm also pleased the legislation includes emergency community development block grant funding. Right now, HUD has no funding available. They can address the housing needs of Vermonters affected both by Hurricane Irene and the flooding of this past spring. These disaster recovery programs are woefully underfunded. So, Mr. President, I can't think of the number of hours that I and other members of the committee have worked on this, the evenings, the phone calls, the weekends, touching base, but it's all worth it. This bill can now be accepted by the other body. We can go forward. We can start doing the rebuilding we need. Vermont's a very special place, not just because it's my home, but because of the spirit of its people. This is a state that's always, always supported help for other states all over the country. We need that help now. And this is a major step forward for that help, and I thank everybody involved with it. It'll be, now all we have to do is get it through the other body, get it on the president's desk, and continue the work of recovery that we're doing both in Vermont and other states damaged by Irene. I'd ask my full statement be made part of the record.
Without objection.
And we talk about the money, I am tempted, and I actually won't resist the temptation to repeat what a Vermonter told me. I've said it before on this floor. We spend unlimited sums to rebuild buildings and roads and bridges in Iraq and Afghanistan, and somebody else comes along and blows them up. Rebuild them in America, for Americans, by Americans, and we Americans will keep them safe. Mr. President, I yield the floor.